We have Paul Walker, and he's going to lead us with his poems and his insights and his wisdom. You're on, Paul.
All right. So this is called Moments of Grace. And as I read this and maybe another one, which is a moment of grace for me when I was, 14, 13, something like that, maybe younger. But I grew up in Michigan. We had an apple orchard. We had 500 trees, apples and plums and pears, and we had 3.5 acres of grapes and maybe 10 acres of vegetables and so on. And we sold them at the farmer's market. And this was part of our business. And the reason I mentioned that is it was hard work. I didn't play intramural sports or any of that because I had to work. But one day, I remembered this following poem, and I wrote it and read it to my father and mother. And my father just started sobbing uncontrollably. He obviously thought that he kind of used us as indentured servants and didn't realize the joy that we had found. So I'm going to read it to you as an inspiration, and I'm really interested in hearing some of your moments of grace from your childhood. I think childhood things we tend to forget, and they're there, when we were more innocent, when we were just swinging from a vine in a tree or something like that. So this is mine, and it's called In Michigan on the Farm. It was sour, sweet, and greening, high potential cider making. Easy picked, sudden eating joy. It was rows and rows of bending, loaded, bumper crop good years, crate piled and ladder filled trees, picked up and driven by the small boy tractor driven, trailer drawn refreshment expeditions. It was busy men and boys, the apple garden walking place, just beside the house, the larger, and over an open field past the creek and a pond, the smaller. It was a place for thinking fathers' walks, bees' busy pollination, and berry picking, ankle scratched orchard times when Topsy, the black and white bouncing dog, chased and barked us home to eat. It was sunrise, truck filling, apple selling, farmer's market, trestle board and plank stand, and the best hamburgers in the world, rewards at the farmer's market refreshment stand. It was the leaning taxi whose labor born, the well-known and always eating, aisle-filling, slightly unclean fat lady at the market, whose legs were so fat they hung over her high-heeled shoes. It was the trip home and the glorious counting of the tin before and during the waiting afternoon meal. It was football games after lunch and high willow climbing days and water playing on the stone in front of the culvert, the origin of the creek. It was a creek that meandered and rushed between burly grass banks and under fallen dried trees, winding its way down to the lush forest. It was a place for floating boat races and running children with guiding sticks, a place to watch the rapids fall down to the river, a creek to see from on high in a weeping willow tree, a creek that had a pond for children's roaring naval toy boat wars. It had a hut on its banks for secret brothers conferences and bandit meeting places just above the bridge on the knoll. It led the wandering woolly band to the river, with the deep swimming holes in the vines that cut the shore. There were leaning trees for danger seeking, brave little Davy Crockett and pirate bright-eyed Gangles with stick swords, and Little John staffs for winning, fallen log fords, and the honor of Robin Hood's merry forest fighting men for good and fun and feathered hats. It was a forest where growing suns gathered mothers, wild weeds, and fragrant forest flowers in a smiling, proud, flowerful, giving, pure, and honest gesture. It was a safe, smooth, closing nights and freshly made, crisp, and cool double-bedded sheets where I fell asleep to dream the day again. It was warm, Sunday sunny, Tarzan ropes, trees, great flying yells, leisurely, rocking afternoons. I'm the highest in the crow's nest, sitting yells from tree to tree, dizzy, flying, fearless, watching blue sky, Treasure Island days. I was a child, free, and running down an orchard path. The little hidden secret grass and flower patch valley, where I would run and roll, arms and legs, laughing, shouting, flying through the air. And with each breath, the earth was close to comfort me. Sorry for getting emotional, but it's one of those childhood I nearly forgot. And when I read this or think of those times, you know, it enlivens me. So I'll read one more and give you a chance to come up with. You don't have to read a whole poem, just a moment of grace and the story behind it, perhaps. So I had a friend who was the high school artist and poet, and he invited me to go on a canoe trip. And he said, oh yeah, these canoe trips are great. Well, it took 2 weeks. We started in the middle of Michigan, Grayling, and went all the way down to Lake Michigan. And this is this poem about that. It's called A Deep Peace. We found that deep peace runs through all existence, floating down a river through a seemingly endless wilderness, one spring, as rebirth blossomed all around us. Moving with the rhythm and flow of the trees that bend in the storms, holding on with roots below the surface, drinking mineral-filled water, feeding the leaves, absorbing the light to reach for the sky as wonder expanded. Home to nesting birds shading us as we floated across its waters, some still on the surface with powerful currents below, others roaring and tumbling over rocks as the land falls towards the Great Lakes as vast as the seas that hold the continents apart. Lightning struck, releasing cracks of sound that shook our canoe, forcing us to shelter along the river on high ground between bending trees, and a screaming concerto that once our fears fell, filled our souls with power like nothing we'd ever experienced. And then suddenly as the storm entered, a clearing opened as sun flowed out of the parting clouds, revealing blue skies hidden by the dark storm. As the days passed, we let go of our worries, feeling the vibrant stillness in our hearts, carrying us into each night. As the campfire lit our faces, warmed our hearts, and provided an island of light to see each other's eyes glowing in wonder before we fell asleep, cradled by the silence in the tabernacle of the trees, domed by crystal stars. We could feel the heartbeat of life rocking us to sleep like a loving mother. Deep peace is everywhere if you look. So I'd like to hear a few moments of grace. Maybe I brought you to remember something from your childhood or anywhere in your life. Whitney.
I come from Rockford, Illinois, Northern Illinois, way outside Chicago.
Yes.
And from a family of farmers, or they had a grocery store for farmers. And your canoe trip, and we used to go up to lakes, and every summer, it just brought back a lot of Midwestern memories that were so precious, so precious. I grew up on a river, and we used to tear around the neighborhood and play, cops and robbers or whatever those games were, flashlight tag at night. And we were quite a team of kids. And it was just wonderful to hear your poem and remember all those things. And on the Rock River, I organized a canoe trip one I remember, we'd go up, it was a whole day long, because it's just a river, it wasn't the Great Lakes, so I do understand the difference. And within 15 minutes of that canoe ride, the canoe with 3 people and all the food would crazy turned over. And we're all soaked, and we lost most of the food, and we survived the day anyway. And it was just one of those highlights of childhood memories. So thank you for your wonderful, beautiful poem. I loved it.
Thank you, Whitney. Thank you for that share. Beautiful. Yeah, we had the food strapped in wooden crates. So it was 2 weeks. So if we lost the food, we were in big trouble. So yeah, we had it strapped in and crates with lids so we wouldn't lose the food should the rapids get the best of us. So all right, who else? Moments of grace. Bill.
Thanks, Paul. Beautiful, lyrical, and bringing me back. Let me add to that region a bit.
All right.
Mostly in Pennsylvania and somewhat in Ohio. So we're in that Illinois, Michigan area there.
Yeah.
And just, oh man, in Pittsburgh, we had a backyard that was really, I didn't know at the time, I just sort of took it for granted, but it was to die for. And it was multiple large trees, and my dad had put in sack swings and a zip line and, all this fun stuff to play in. And oh man, there was a lake and there was just all this kind of stuff. And I remember playing Army, which we did. That was the thing. And the interesting thing, I will share something. You picked apples that was a chore that you did.
Yeah, 500 trees. Yeah.
We picked apples, crab apples, up off the ground to throw them away.
There we go.
Occasionally my mom would make a pie with those things, but they were so sour. They went into the mulch pile, and so our chore was to pick them up off the ground and ultimately to get them to be mulched. So not a useful use of apples, but it brought back those memories. Thanks.
Thank you, Bill. That's great. Great to hear. Let's see. Any other moments of grace? You better come up with someone. I'll read another poem.
I
Oh,
do.
Bonnie.
I do. My experience was more in the Southwest. I actually lived in a little steel town out by San Bernardino until I was about 14. And we would go over every summer to my grandparents. These were my father's parents in Flagstaff, Arizona. My aunt and her husband lived there too. And we just had the most incredible times of going over there for 2 or 3 weeks in the summer. My mother told me at some point, as I was an adult, that she really wished that my dad would have taken us more to these church conferences and stuff. Well, my dad had grown up in Flagstaff, and he insisted on taking us to Flagstaff every year. And it was just so incredible as we would drive into the area. A lot of times we would come in the back way. We'd actually come through an old ghost town and come over the hill, and we would just see Oak Creek Canyon out in the distance. And it was just that anticipation of what was coming. And then when we were there, just all the adventures that we would have, sliding down rocks to go into the really cold water in Oak Creek Canyon, and just all kinds of experiences there. Climbing up Sunset Crater, if any of you have ever been over in that area, there's a whole section where there's Sunset Crater, which is the old volcano, and some Indian ruins out there. And we could actually climb up that crater. They won't let you do it now, but my grandfather would take us up there. And, but the main thing that came to mind when we were talking about moments of grace, part of that experience was that my grandfather was the mechanic for Northern Arizona University. And in fact, my grandparents lived on that campus for a while in a little house until it was torn down to build more buildings. And he would take us, he would have these wonderful buses that he worked on, and then he would drive college students around in it. He would take them to football games and take them up to the snow resorts in the winter. And he would drive us around town in that bus just so we could have that experience. And I can remember running up and down the bus and then running to see my grandfather, and just the way that he would look at me with just such delight and such love that I felt this unconditional love from him that I really wasn't experiencing in other ways in my life. And that has informed my life so completely to have had that experience with my grandfather. I actually wrote about him. I wrote about that experience. I don't know if I should.
Yeah.
Should I read? Well, I don't want to take up too much time, but I did write something some years ago when I was going through a poetry therapy process about my past, about my upbringing. And so this is what I wrote. It's not very long. It's just called My Grandfather's Eyes. My grandfather's eyes taught me so many things I didn't learn from my own father, his son. My grandfather's eyes told me I was good. They told me I was valuable and special, and most of all, loved. They taught me how to play inside their sparkles. My grandfather's eyes passed along messages from his grandmother, my great-great-grandmother, the powerful spiritualist, the one who knew how to heal with love. Messages from her heart through his eyes to my heart. You are a precious gift and a joy to the world. Live your truth, own your power. It is the power of love, and no one can take that away from you ever. My grandfather's eyes held my light until one day I looked in the mirror and found it shining in my own.
Thank you, Marnie.
Yeah, thank you.
Linda.
I want to talk about a little discovery, a a huge discovery that I made when I was very little. Thank you for all the beautiful memories that I have heard. Those were not mine. My house was very disordered. My dad was not there. I was 3, and I was in my brother's room. He was 1. My mom was standing over him, the crib, the floor full of stuff. I couldn't see anything, and I felt so alone. So alone. I saw a string just on top of things, and I pushed it. And out of the corner near the crib, a flag or a kite jumped up, and my brother cried. And it was in that moment that my heart opened and I loved him.
Thank you. Beautiful. Nita and then Michael. Have to unmute.
This isn't very together, but it's something I wrote and would like to. It's certainly not on the order of the great stuff people are saying, but here's a little poem I wrote. My great grandmother's name was Mary Magdalene, but she called herself Molly. Her husband's name was Vermilion. Folks called him Ed. She was tiny and fierce. He was big and strong with white hair and a big heart and a handlebar mustache to match. After Ed passed and Molly got really old, she sat in her rocker at the front window of her house at the corner of the street at the edge of the square in a little town in the middle of Texas. The old White House with a big porch and swing for 2 in the front yard. Every morning she brushed, looped, and pinned up her very long white hair. A big coffee can was at her feet for the discreet disposal of her snuff spit. She watched all day as the townspeople would come and go to the Piggly Wiggly and the hardware store and the Five and Dime, enjoying the sweet smell of the corner creamery that filled the air. Her feather bed was in that room too, so she didn't have to go far at the end of the day. Her grown daughters and their husbands took turns living with her in that sweet white house. Ella, the abused one, a single mother of 9, a talented, exhausted seamstress. Effie, the wild one, married 5 times. Ola, the sad one, stopped from running away with the traveling musician she loved. And Verna, the young one, pretty and happily married. Her 3 sons simply volunteered their wives to the tasks. At family reunions, all us young ones would visit her rocker and kiss her on the cheek, except me. As a 4-year-old, I thought everyone was blowing in her ear. She said later that I made her deaf.
Thank you. Moments. Let's see.
Michael?
Michael?
Yeah, I won't speak a lot. I just, as always, these memories you bring up, Paul, of your childhood are so deeply held and treasured. They touch all of us. I can never escape in these moments the sense of how different my childhood was. I've made a joke in the past about how I used to regard Dick and Jane as alien beings. Because when we were given Dick and Jane books, I used to say, who is this Dick? Who is this Jane? They have this dog Spot. I have no dog Spot. And they have trees, fir trees. Well, we have palm trees. And everything about Dick and Jane, of course, was completely alien to the world I lived in, because I lived in a place apart. And so everything about my growing up was a contrast to what I was being told elsewhere. But the deepest and most treasured memories of my childhood, for very, very earliest memories, was going to Yosemite. I can remember maybe at age 6, when Yosemite was essentially not developed at that time. There was Camp Curry, and this is 1956, by the way. So there's Camp Curry, and then there were a few of the cabins, and we would get a cabin out there at the base in the middle of the Great Valley. And I remember just getting peanuts and sitting on the porch of the cabin, and we'd have 3 or 4 squirrels all over our knees, just piling up. They would literally crawl up your leg and eat out of your hand. And you would just have this wonderful sense of nature coming along. And as a little kid, this was miraculous.
Yeah.
And the sense of the pines and everything, and this being in this massive temple of nature, even as a child, that overwhelmed me. Feeling like I was in a place like this elect kind of a place that was so completely different than anywhere else in my life, had a feeling of being very special, being selected, or somehow, just being able to visit this place. So that has stayed with me consistently. I continue to go back to Sequoia and to these places I started with, and to the North Rim. Just, they are recurrent spiritual recharge places through the entirety of my life. Thank you.
Thomas has his hand up.
Go ahead, Thomas. You have to unmute, Thomas.
Oh, all right. Thank you. Thank you for the reminder. Anyway, I love the title, Moments of Grace. I've had many. And so today I just wrote this poem, and I'll be brief. Today, listening to life as it is, unknown suffering, the Ukraine, folks moving as I did, nature abounding, palms, trees, and flowers. So grateful for friends who helped me move. Graces galore, climbing trees, Aunt Viola's orchard in visiting with my dad in the truck. Grateful for loving call last night. How lucky I am as I anticipate another sunrise. So thank you, Paul, for, I think, poetry. And I was the vice president of the National Poetry Therapy Association for like 10 years, and have always considered myself a closet poet. But and I think poetry just is the language of the heart, and allows us to appreciate the moments of grace around us all the time, and even the suffering moments. So they make the graceful moments even greater. Amen. So
Thank you, Thomas. Yeah, lovely. Levita.
Paul, I'm just loving this morning and how everyone is just opening up and sharing from the deep, deep wells of life experience. One thing is, I'm wondering, what was the configuration of what's your birth order? I know you've said you had brothers, but it's like, I'm curious about that. So I'll leave that for now.
Okay.
And my experience as I'm listening to everybody is how impactful the region that you shared these memories from. I was born and raised in Santa Monica area, but my summers were spent in Oklahoma with my grandparents. And there's nothing quite like a humid, hot summer in Oklahoma in these southern regions. And this is the area where the grapes of wrath were evoked from, with the Dust Bowl and the hardship and survival that my ancestors lived through. I have memories of hardworking women in their southern cotton dresses, glistening as so magical, with sweat dripping off of them, with baking pies and churning butter. And you know, my grandpa out in the barn milking the cows, and he would squirt milk into the kittens that were all around meowing on, you know. And it's like, these are just, that's my Oklahoma memories. And you know, I got to slop the hogs, which was wonderful, and always told not to get in the pens with them because they would eat me as well. You know, I was just a sweaty little kid that would be mixed up with the hog slop, which was recycling everything, you know, nothing was wasted back there. And a memory that a couple that stands out, just monumental. How do you herd a bunch of wiggly, active children? Well, it's like one of the remedies they would send us out in the fields to herd the cattle back in. But out in the fields, there was what I thought was a pond that was icy cold and wonderful. And I could get in the water at the edges, only to find out there were water moccasins, which are a poisonous snake that hide in the high grass around the edges of the pond. Why I never got bit, I'll never know, but I didn't. But while we were out collecting the cows, and we had the farm dogs with us, one of the dogs kept knocking my brother down, and I'd go pick him up and fuss at the dog. Ultimately, what happened was Tom got too close to a big rock that was housing a rattlesnake den. The dog took all the hits.
Oh.
That dog saved our lives, impacted a memory how quickly life can change. And we all mortified children stood around and watched him blow up like a balloon, yapping and shaking as his nervous system was attacked by the snakes. Conversely, my California dreams were around the Kern River that claimed many lives, but I would climb out to the furthest rock I could get to avoid my brother, who taunted me terribly. And I would lay out there, and it's kind of like an experience I had on Nita's deck once, was listening to the freeway sound. It sounds like a river if you open your mind and let the sound transform. And the Kern River ended up sounding like applause to me. And I would dream on the rock of being a star and being applauded. And I would doze off and get a terrible sunburn because my Irish skin would just soak up all the rays. And it's like, thank you, Paul. I have some writing to enjoy.
You're welcome.
But the regions play such an important part of our memories and our experiences that go so deeply in our psyche.
And
Thank
to
you.
answer your question, I'm the oldest of four. So the youngest brother is 15 years younger, and there's 5 years between us. So I did a lot of parenting.
There's a lot of stories in there just all by itself.
Oh yeah, a lot of stories there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, who else? Moments of grace.
Michelle,
Diana,
and Michelle has her hand up.
Michelle, okay. Diana, then Michelle.
Okay. Gosh, it reminded me how nature deprived basically I was. I grew up in a very cerebral family in Beverly Hills. And in those days, Beverly Hills was like, just like any little small town. It was really quite sweet. Rodeo Drive had a bridle path down it. People rode their horses. It was not the chic street that it is now. My best friend lived half a block away, and we would walk up to Beverly Drive, and there was like a dime store and a Learner's, and I mean, it was just a sweet little place. The Will Wright's ice cream parlor, and the pet store that we would visit, and the gramophone shop where we would go sit in booths and play the 45 records and so on. But I was basically, without my best friend, so lonely. Basically, children were to be seen and not heard. And I was sent off to boarding school at the age of 8 for a year, which was only 3 miles from my house, because I made my father nervous, and so did my brother. And that was so profoundly lonely. There were only about 8 boarders, and none of them were as young as I was. So that's my core wound, loneliness. But I did have this this beautiful grace of a grandmother who lived until I was about 10. And she was an entrepreneur. Her husband was deaf, and she ran a boarding house. And my mother would sometimes drop me off to be with her when she had to go to an appointment. And this grandmother, even this year, revelations keep coming back to me about how profoundly she affected my life, because she was the most amazing cook, and she raised chickens. She'd go out and grab a chicken by the neck and swing it around her head and come in and pluck it and make the most divine fried chicken in the world. And everybody loved her food so much. And so she was always, there were all these people sitting around a table. And I was very affected by that, by the community that was created. And my mother was scolding her one day, and she said, well, you have to be careful of these people. Sometimes they go off and they don't pay you, and so on. And my grandmother said, I just don't want to not trust people. I just want to believe in the goodness of people. And that had an effect on me. She would stop everything and she would sew a dress for my doll. I hated dolls. That should have been a clue. I thought I wanted 5 children until I had one. And it just blew my mind to find out that I didn't like taking care of babies. It just didn't come naturally to me at all. But the way she would gather people together, and she sewed, she made everything in the house, was all the curtains and the sheer little ruffles and things on the beds, and she just had this warmth and goodness about her, that she was like a fountain of bringing people together, of connecting people around the table. And I just never realized what a model she was for me. I've been an entrepreneur all my life. I've always wanted to gather people around the table and have just exactly these kinds of conversations that we're having, that were not surface, words, that we would really get to know each other. And as I'm listening to this, Michelle and I are doing a retreat in Costa Rica in September called Soul Stories. And I love the way that Paul opened this with, it was this and it was that. I sometimes do writing where I'm writing, it was a time when, recapturing that. But I just loved all of the nature and all of the sensations that you brought out of us, Paul. So I'm just loving this morning very, very, very much to be with all of you in this way.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you. Who else?
Michelle.
Michelle.
Michelle, okay.
I know my spelling is so strange and it's really a stumble whenever people see like, how do I pronounce it? But I thank you so much, Paul, for your poetry and for the memories and also for that idea that place really defines us in many ways in our early childhood. I was born and raised in Alaska. I'm a third generation Alaskan. And so your poetry evoked memories of me in my snowsuit in the dead of winter in February behind our wrought iron cyclone fence, watching the dog sleds come down C Street, which I lived on during the fur rendezvous races. We were obviously on the other side of the fence for protection. I also was reminded of making popcorn and selling it in a little stand by our house. And in the olden days, we didn't have bags to put popcorn in. So we made them out of wax paper, cut them, and then had to staple them and close them. And my mother would be making the popcorn and we would be selling it. I also was reminded of going down to Chester Creek, which was not that far from my house. And my brother would be playing with his friends, but I would be sitting by the side of the water. And honestly, when I think about it, I would be doing a lot of dreaming about the kind of life that I wanted to live and the places I wanted to go. And on Sundays, my mother would make up her Southern fried chicken and potato salad, and we would pile into our Ford Fairlane and later our Triumph Herald, and we would make our way out to the Anchorage airport. And we would watch the planes take off. And that was our Sunday activity. And, and I would say, oh, I would give anything to be on a plane and get to go and see something of the world, because in Alaska, you go north to Fairbanks and south toward Homer, and that was about it. The Chugach Mountain Range is on one side, the Cook Inlet on the other. And as a single parent family, I just couldn't even imagine how that would happen until I had the chance to do that when I was 14 and went all the way to Washington, D.C. and represented Alaska at the White House Conference on Children and Youth. And so all of those memories, having the mountains, my first time fishing ever was ice fishing, going by small plane and them cutting a hole in the ice. And I catch this fish and I'm so excited about it. And I want to hold on to the fish. And the father of who flew the plane, who had his own agency, kept saying to me, Michelle, the fish is going to stink. And he said, we got to cook the fish. Why don't you write a story about the fish? Which I did. And let's cook it. And just to smell that wood burning stove, the trout cooking over the stove, there's nothing quite like it when you're in the wild. Fish tastes so much different when you catch it yourself and you cook it. And I think about all those memories of Alaska, and people would sometimes say to me, you're so courageous, you're such a frontier woman, you travel all over the world, you're never afraid. And I said, when you're raised looking out at majestic mountains, it gives you strength. When you look out at expansive water and you think about what's possible in the world, it ignites your imagination. And so for me, being raised in Alaska, and all of those incredible memories are something I draw on even now, because of the strength and the expansiveness and the idea there's so much more of the world to explore. All we have to do is just say yes and see where that takes us. So thank you, Paul, for the beauty of your poetry, for the memories that you evoked in me, and for the ability to put that on paper and share it so other people could be blessed by it and remember as a result of it.
Thank you, Michelle.
Yeah.
Afton?
And then Pamela.
Well, I love deepening knowing each other through sharing this childhood, blessings that we've had. And I have so much overlapping with so many of you. I didn't know there were so many of us who grew up here in Los Angeles area. I too remember the bridle paths and wheelwrights and the sleepy little college town of Westwood with a Sears and a Ralph's. And I also went to Iowa when I was 9 and stayed on a farm that my relatives had with the corn and the cows and slopping the pigs. And I have that in my psyche. I went to Yosemite when it was still very wild and saw the firefalls and stayed in Camp Curry in, I think, 1949, 1950. My mom used to take us there every year. So I feel it cross pollinating of memory as each of you is sharing these various parts of yourself. It's a wonderful way of deepening. And so, Paul, thank you very much.
You're welcome, Afton. Thank you.
Pamela.
Go ahead. Who?
Pamela.
Oh, Pamela. Okay.
Bonjour tout le monde. Ça va? Tout va bien? Oui, juste... attends. Okay, c'est bien, c'est bien. Pardon. Okay. I had gifts from both my parents. I am so much a Gemini. I'm so much a person who holds opposites. And my childhood was going back and forth from the New York area to California, in the beginning San Francisco, because my mother was in San Francisco, my father was in New York. We made history. My father got custody of me when I was 5 years old. Okay, so, but they both gifted me wonderfully, and they both had a lot of love and a lot of style. My father was an entertainment director, and he was of service. And when I started playing the accordion when I was a little girl, so I just loved music. And then my father would take me to visiting veterans hospitals and so forth, and we'd play our accordions together. His accordion was enormous, mine was tiny, but I could see the smile in people's faces, and I really enjoyed that. And my father liked humor, but he had no memory, like I have no memory. So he'd put his jokes on the cards, and he'd read the cards, and everybody smiled. And I thought, well, that was nice, and they seemed to be happy, even though they're sick in bed or whatever. And then way on the end, when my father was dying, and I was visiting him, he was sick, and he was an old man, and but he still would pull out his jokes. And remember that before that, people were smiling. Do you know what happened when he pulled out his jokes? Near the last days of his life, last weeks, people laughed. Do you know why they laughed? Because all of a sudden, he had good timing. He knew the power of silence, the power of a pause. And that was a huge gift for me. And then on my mother's side, she was a model, and she in New York for a while. Then she was the top saleswoman at Joseph Magnon's in San Francisco. She had enormous style. And when I visited my mother, she would buy clothes for me. Well, let me put it this way. My father I'd get clothes with my father. Okay. And I looked sort of like I don't know, like a maid of 12 years old or something. Then I'd visit my mother, and I had all these wonderful clothes. Then I'd go back to New York and go to school, and everybody, the teachers, the kids were like, wow, look at those clothes. You look great. You know, so there was these opposites, but I kind of gathered these opposites. And my mother, who was slender and beautiful all the time, she said, can't you just be slender? Because I was always medium. And my father said, can't you just be normal? Because I always was abnormal. So it was, God bless both of them. You know, it's amazing when people pass, you still feel them. They're with you forever. And I was blessed with these two wonderful, wonderful people. And so my memories of my childhood have enormously to do with these two beautiful human beings. Oh.
Thank you. It's lovely. Lovely. I think we probably have time for one more if someone has something. Afton?
Yeah, I wanted to add one thing. I see Julianne isn't here, but I wish she were here to hear this. One of my major childhood memories of nature is in Cuba with Julianne's family when I was 8. And that was a whole nother world of fish and underwater and warm seas and castles falling down and sugarcane plantation farmers and hurricanes. And that summer with Julianne was an incredible part of my childhood. So I wish she were, maybe she'll listen to the recording and get me.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
And I have one quick things to add too, Paul. All those crab apples we had, you know, I have a confession to make. My father worked for Gulf Oil, and that was the Gulf building was the tallest building in Pittsburgh. One time he took us for a little tour there. And what he didn't know is that we had stuffed our pockets with these crab apples. When he wasn't looking, we chucked them over the top of the Gulf building. So if anyone here knows of anybody that was injured from a falling crab apple that day, you know, I confess.
That's a great story.
What about Nita or Harvey or we haven't heard from so many, Sam?
We have time for maybe one or two more.
Okay. Ron, were you raising your hand or just? Carolyn? Well, Ron unmutes.
Okay, so my dad at one point had a position as administrator of a 2,000 bed hospital in Illinois. And I was lucky enough to have, we had a big house there, and the main doctor had a house there, and the chief engineer had a house there. And the chief engineer's house was way up. This was like a college campus. It was a huge place. And when we first went there were these hogs, and we used to throw stones at them because we thought we were so smart or something. Anyway, they were huge. And I didn't move there till I was about 9. Anyway, the chief engineer had a daughter who was a little older than I, and she also was a horse aficionado. And at one point she had 2 horses, and we would go riding together. And there were all these hills and plateaus and so on. And we got to be the Lone Ranger and whoever we wanted to be. And then there was a friend down the way who had a farm and a cow, and we wanted to chase the cow. And she said, no, what do you think? You'll get cottage cheese. So, and I have fond memories of using my large muscles and cleaning out the stalls. And I grew to love the smell of horse manure, because of what it meant, and taking care of horses. And I was always just shocked when I'd come home for dinner and my mother said, you have to change your clothes before you sit at the dining table.
That's great. Thank you, Carolyn. All right, I think we're about out of time, but my favorite poet, as you all know, is John O'Donohue. And I think this session fits this little quote. He said, I would love to live like a river flows, surprised by its own unfolding. And hasn't the river of thought here unfolded and surprised us all? It was wonderful. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Paul.
Thank you, Paul.